Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you tonight. Thanks for being here for this time of Bible study on Wednesday night. We appreciate you very much. We're studying and have just really gotten a good start on the book of Job in the Old Testament. Job is one of the books of the Old Testament that's often referred to as wisdom literature. Sometimes they're called the books of poetry. We think that the events described in the book of Job are ancient events that happened long ago. We've speculated, we don't know, we couldn't say for sure, but we've speculated that maybe if you wanted to sort of get an idea of the time frame, maybe back in the time of Abraham is when Job lived, possibly. We don't know who wrote and recorded the account of what happened, or when that might have happened. We don't know who the author is. We don't know when it was written. We believe it depicts true historical events, though, and we believe it certainly is to be included among the inspired books of the Old Testament. So chapters 1 and 2, you know them well, when Satan posed a challenge, Actually, God initiated the challenge because God 2 times said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Job was a righteous man, and he says to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And Satan's answer was basically yes, and it really frustrates me that I can't get at him because you have blessed him so much. You've showered so many blessings on him. The only reason he's serving you is because you have just overwhelmed him with abundance and blessings. If you took those blessings away, he'd stop serving you. In fact, he'd curse you. And God said, "Well, okay, try it." And so Satan at first caused Job to lose everything. All of his considerable wealth, his children, everything. But Job remained faithful to God, didn't sin. Right at the end of chapter 1, we've mentioned it a couple times. Chapter 1, verse 22, "In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly," when he had lost everything. So in chapter 2, Satan comes again and said, skin for skin. All the man hath he give for his life. Chapter 2, verse 4. Let me get at him personally. Let me affect his personal health. And God said, "Okay, but don't kill him." And so then, as we studied last week, he was horribly afflicted with all kinds of health problems. We don't even know the extent of it, but it was bad enough that when his friends came to see him, they didn't even recognize him. That's how bad he was physically afflicted with all the ailment that he was suffering with. And so the first 2 chapters are well known for that. So 3 friends came, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, in chapter 2, verse 11. And last week we talked about the fact that the last verse there, verse 13, "They sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great." And we talked about all of that last week. Chapter 3, and we got pretty well through most of chapter 3. Chapter 3 is often called Job's soliloquy. In other words, Job just lamenting. He just bemoaning the terrible condition that he is in. He curses the day of his death. He curses the day of his birth, and wish that he had never been born. We talked about that last week. Let's pick up that reading in chapter 3 now. Job chapter 3 at verse 11. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? The King James Version says, "Why did the knees prevent me?" But probably a better translation is, "Why did the knees receive me?" He's talking about his delivery as an infant. Why the breast that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet, I should have slept. Then had I been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver, or as a hidden untimely birth, I had not been as infants which never saw the light. So again, he's just lamenting the horrible condition that he's in. It would be better if he had never been born, or that he died at birth. If he had done that, he would have been with great men, kings and princes, those who had been powerful in their lifetimes. If he could have just died at birth, he would have been much better off. So you get the idea clearly that Job views death as sort of an end of earth's miseries, right? And that's not a totally inaccurate view of life for the ones who are faithfully serving God. I think that's the key component there. And Job was a righteous man. God commended him as a great man. And so for a great person, faithfully serving God, righteous and faithful in all things, death will be the end of suffering. Death will be the end of life's troubles. That's one of the things that we look forward to, and I think that's one of the things that we really, try to preach and emphasize is there's a reward for the righteous. God has promised that a wonderful eternal existence in heaven for those who serve Him faithfully. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the world's population think that they have that to look forward to, and they don't. And that's a sad reality for them. They expect something that they won't get. But one of the reasons, certainly that God, one of the methods God uses to motivate our faithful service is the promise of a reward in eternity where the troubles of life are past. We sing songs about that and so forth, and Job looked at it that way. So, and then let's just read to the end of the chapter. Again, all of this is Job's lament. He's just in agony, and he's bemoaning his condition. Eric, do you have a thought?
Well, why do you think Job would think that kings and counselors and princes would be rewarded after death?
I'm not sure why he would. He may have not been thinking of specific individuals. He's just saying, in death, I'll be on a par with even the greatest who've died and gone on. All of this will be put behind. I don't think he's saying necessarily that a wicked king or a corrupt person would be there, but I think that's just sort of poetic language in which he's suggesting, I'm in a miserable state right now, but I will be with the great and powerful. When this life is, we'll all be on an even keel. Wayne?
Yeah, I think he's saying the same thing that Solomon found out. That all people are going to meet the same fate.
Yeah.
We all are going to come to the point of death, whether we're the greatest or whether we're the least.
Yeah.
We're all going to face the same fate.
Yeah. And so I think he's generalizing there. I don't think he's trying to be specific. Good point. All right, let's just read to the end of the chapter here at verse 20. Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul, which long for death, but it cometh not, and dig for it more than for hid treasures, which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the waters. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came. And so, again, you can just kind of view chapter 3 as Job bemoaning the condition that he is in. He wonders why, he's allowed to linger in this condition. Why a person in such misery? He longs for death. He wants to die, and it does not come. And he wonders why that is so. I think sort of the telling verses there are the last ones. The thing which I greatly feared is come upon me. And so I think that's probably a reality of life. Probably all of us worry about could it happen to me? Could I become deathly ill? Could I linger and suffer in agony? Could intense hardships come upon me? I think probably everybody thinks about that from time to time and wonders what will life bring to pass. Job clearly had thought of those things, and he says, that which I greatly feared has come upon me. All of this trouble, all of the loss that he had suffered, and then the loss of his physical health, the very worst scenario, the worst thing that could happen has happened, and Job is bemoaning that situation. So that's chapter 3. That's sort of the summary of how chapter 3 unfolds. Any thoughts or comments? So we've got Job. We see the circumstance that he's in. We've been introduced to his 3 friends. We know their names, but we don't know what they're going to say to him when they finally begin to speak. But we know they're there. They've been with him for several days. And finally Job begins the conversation by just describing what a horrible shape he's in and sort of the agony that he's suffering. So his 3 friends now are going to speak. And a lot of times the book of Job is divided up into, they call them cycles of speeches. Each of the men will speak, Job will respond to them. There'll be this first cycle and then another and so on. And so this first cycle of speeches is going to begin in chapter 4 as Eliphaz will be the first to address Job and talk to him about what he perceives is at the root of all this. Why has all this come upon Job? Now, I think all of us know the book well enough to know their argument is going to be, Job, come on, man, you got to come clean. We know that you have sinned. We know there's something really, really bad going on in your life, and you just need to open up, confess that, repent of it, get right with God, because this wouldn't be happening to you if you were living right. God wouldn't let this happen to you. So that's going to be their basic approach. They start out. I think they're going to say some hard things. I think they start out rather mildly, and then the intensity of their accusation against Job sort of increases as these speeches go on. So, chapter 4, verse 1, and we're not going to read these speeches, and all this exchange gets rather lengthy, and so we're just going to kind of skip through and pick out some highlights of each of these speeches. But in chapter 4, verse 1, then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, so Eliphaz answered, Job has just bewailed his condition. I wish he could die. He doesn't understand why this is happening to him, why God would let this go on, and why he couldn't just die and be done with it all. And so the King James actually says, I think most versions do, that Eliphaz's response is an answer to what Job has just been saying, bewailing his condition. So the main argument that he's going to make, look at verse 7, chapter 4, verse 7. Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. All right. So if you wanted to just pluck out a couple of verses there that summarize the position that he's presenting, those verses do a good job of that. Whoever perished being innocent. In other words, you're in bad shape, Job. You get the idea. There's no argument about the horrible shape that Job's in. But his argument is basically, if you were innocent, this wouldn't be the case. No one ever perished who was innocent. The righteous don't get cut off like you have been cut off. I have seen, in other words, his personal experience, he's drawing from his, he's not speaking from revelation here. And I think it's kind of important to emphasize, he's speaking from his own personal conclusions drawn from things that he has personally observed. He's not saying, God has told me that the righteous are never cut off. God has told me that innocent people never suffer. He's not saying that he received a revelation about that. Now, we're going to talk about a vision that he refers to in a minute. But he's saying, notice, I have seen, verse 8, that they who plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. You're reaping what you sowed, Job. And what's happening to you as a result of your errors, your sins, all the bad that you've been committing. So you're just reaping as you have sown. That's his argument. Now, he does make reference to a vision. Skip down to verse 12. Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and mine ear received a little thereof, in thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth upon men. Fear came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. A spirit passed before my face, the hair of my flesh stood up. And so he's referencing what he referred to as a vision in the night, in which his argument there, I think, is that this vision confirms the conclusions that I have drawn, that the righteous do not suffer. Innocent people do not suffer. Therefore, Job, you are not righteous and you are not innocent. This is the conclusion I've reached. And I had a vision or a dream that made me think that this is true, that this is the right conclusion. Now, I got a question for you. God did reveal things to people in visions in those times, right? Some of inspired information from God to man came in the form of visions, dreams even, right? Can you think of a Bible character who had a revelatory dream or dreams? Joseph interpreted dreams. Yeah, well, he did have a dream. He had dreams himself about how it would turn out with him and his brothers and his mother and father. And he interpreted dreams of Pharaoh. Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which was revelatory. So God did reveal things in dreams and visions. How would a person of that time be able to, we all have dreams, right? So, I mean, God's not revealing truth today. God's inspired revelation is finished. But if you live back in that time when some people were receiving revelatory dreams, how would you determine just a regular run-of-the-mill dream versus a revelatory dream? How would you do that? Any thoughts? Wade?
Well, I think it's laid out in the scriptures. It says that if whatever comes true, then it's from God. If it's not, if it doesn't come true, then it wouldn't.
Well, that's said about prophecy in general, right? Yeah, okay. Other thoughts? Wayne?
Yeah, typically you would have an angel would come and there would be an understanding of who it was that was speaking. Here it's just, I had this real bad dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
Typically when one would have a revelatory dream, there would be an identification of the one who is presenting the dream to him.
Okay. So this just almost sounds like a nightmare, that he had a bad nightmare. Versus, and I didn't write any down, but you might think of some of those instances. It might be worth looking up some of those instances where people had true visions from God. The other thing, though, is that nothing that could come by way of a vision would contradict other things that are known to be true from God, right? So a person wouldn't receive a vision and the vision was contradictory to something else that was already known to be true from God.
There's an error presented here.
Yeah.
In verse 18 he says, he puts no trust in God. He puts no trust even in his servants. Well, we know that's not true because God said, "Have you considered my servant Job?
Yeah.
There's none like him in all the earth." And you can test him and
Yeah.
see for yourself.
Yeah.
God put a lot of trust and confidence in Job
Yeah.
to present Satan or Job to Satan
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah, good point. Good point. That might be the verse that we need to highlight. There is 18. That God does put trust in individuals. He trusted Job. In fact, he trusted Job. Remember, we talked about 1 Corinthians 10:13. God is not going to allow you to be tempted above that you're able to resist. That's true now. It was true back then. God trusted Job. God trusted that Job would not reject him. God trusted that Job would not curse him, and therefore let Satan put these trials on him, because he knew that Job could handle it. So he does trust. And so again, I think that it's a little bit challenging there. Eliphaz says, "I had a dream," which I believe confirms the conclusions that I have personally reached. Got to be really careful about that. And I would think even in that day when God was giving dreams and visions that revealed things, you would have had to have been careful. You know, when Joseph went before Pharaoh, for instance, to interpret his dreams, he said God is the interpreter of dreams. You know, Daniel did the same. Daniel gave credit to God for the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. And so you would have had to have been very careful in such a time, because everybody dreams and not all dreams have meaning. And so that would have been a challenge to detect a revelatory dream from just a regular dream. But the overriding principle is that nothing in any form could contradict what was known to be true. But I think that's a kind of a challenging thing. But anyway, he's convinced that the dream meant something. But he's wrong. And we know he's wrong. He's going to be proven to be wrong. As the book goes on, he's going to be, Eliphaz and the others are going to be rebuked for their error. And so he's wrong. He's put a lot of trust in that dream that he had, but his conclusion is wrong. And so we know that in this case for sure. So in chapter 5, he's still speaking. And in chapter 5, verse 8, he's giving his advice to Job. In Job chapter 5, verse 8, he said, "I would seek unto God, and to God I would commit my cause." And skip down to verse 17. "Behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty." So seek God and don't despise this chastening. This chastening is coming. Again, you have to understand that what he's saying, this chastening is coming upon you because you need it, because you've been a bad person. You've been guilty of evil and wickedness, and God is chastening you accordingly to what you've done. So seek God and do not despise God's chastening, because God's trying to get you to come around and do the right thing. Thoughts or comments on Eliphaz's speech here in chapters 4 and 5? We're going to kind of go through these and hit the highlights, but I think we get the point. Anybody? Clayton?
I was just thinking, I had a dream a week ago, and this demon was telling me what to do. And I even knew the name of the demon. And I woke up, and it felt so real. I looked it up on Google. I was like, is this real? But I don't understand. Of course, it was some made-up word. And it just led me to think about, people that think God speaks to them and tells them stuff. If I wasn't kind of grounded in the Word, I might have very well believed whatever it was I was dreaming. That was a message from God. That's what I need to go and do.
Yeah. But in your case, you know that God is not doing that now, and therefore you could dismiss that as being just a dream, a nightmare dream. And that's what would have had, I think it would have been harder in the day when God actually was revealing some things through dreams, but nothing from God is ever contradictory. God does not contradict himself. Josh?
Yeah, just kind of bit off that. He had that preconceived idea, then he had this dream, so then he built the whole argument. In verse 27, he says, "Lo, this we have searched it, so it is,
think you're exactly right. I think that is a good verse to bring out right at the end of his speech there, as Josh just pointed out in verse 27. So if you back up to verse 17, happy is the man whom God correcteth, therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. For he maketh sore and bindeth up. He woundeth and his hands make whole. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles. Yea, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee. In famine he will redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of destruction when it cometh. At destruction and famine thou shalt laugh, neither shalt thou be afraid of the beast of the earth. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beast of the field shall be at peace with thee. Thou shalt know that thy tabernacle shall be in peace, and thou shalt visit thy habitation, and shalt not sin. Thou shalt know also that thy seed will be great, and thine offspring as the grass of the earth. Thou shalt come to thy grave in full age, as a shock of corn cometh in his season. Okay, so if you take this correction from God, and if you correct yourself, and if you truly repent, and if you come around, and if you stop doing all this stuff you've been doing, we don't know what you've been doing, but we know you've been doing something. And if you stop all that business, if you will accept this chastening from God, verse 17, then everything else will start lining up for you again. And everything will be good. But as Josh pointed out, verse 17, this conclusion, we have searched it, for it is, and so it is. Hear it and know thou it for thy good. So that expression there in verse 27, we have searched it out. The New American Standard Version uses the words investigated. We've investigated this. And so this is the conclusion we have drawn. This is the way we understand things to be. All right, so Eliphaz, I don't think there's any mistaking what Eliphaz is saying. We get his point, but of course he's wrong. And Job knows he's wrong, and so Job is going to respond. That's the way this goes now for the next many chapters here in the book of Job. One of these comforters or friends is going to speak, and Job's going to respond. Remember, they came to comfort him. They're not comforting him. It's not helping. This is what they're saying is not helping, because they're falsely accusing him. They're accusing him of that which is not true. So Job answers, beginning in chapter 6, verse 1. Job answered and said, "Oh, that my grief were roughly weighed, and my calamity laid in the balances together. For now it be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words are swallowed up." Verse 4. "For the arrows of the Almighty are within me, the poison whereof drinketh up my spirit. The terrors of God do set themselves in array against me." All right, so he basically speaks again about the great burden that he is under. These words that he's speaking are prompted by all the troubles that he is enduring. Now, I think you begin to, and we're going to see this, and this is going to elevate. This is going to grow. But notice how he ascribes this to God. The terrors of God do set themselves in array against me. Now, I think this is the first hint that he's going to, before all is said and done, he's going to be accusing God and saying things against God that he shouldn't say. And this may be the first hint of that. But he says the reason he's speaking as he speaks is because of the heavy grief that he's under, all the burden that he is bearing. And again, in verses 8 and 9, he just wishes it would all end. Verse 8, chapter 6, verse 8, "Oh, that I might have my request, and that God would grant me the thing that I long for, even that it would please God to destroy me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off." And so again, he longed for death, and he wished that God would allow it to be so. I'm sure, I don't think Job is the only person ever. I think that happens a lot when people are in really difficult physical condition in particular, it's not uncommon for somebody to say, I'm ready to go. I'm ready for this to be over, And we've had friends and family members who've longed for death because they realize just how bad their condition is and is not likely to improve, and they just wish it would be over. And Job is in that kind of situation. Anybody thought, Wayne?
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in what Eliphaz is saying. He says in verse 5 and 3, I have seen, and again he's talking from a human perspective, I have seen the foolish taking root in my curses abode immediately. His sons, the foolish sons, are far from safety. That's true. They're even oppressed in the gate. That's true. Neither is there deliverer. Some of what he says is true, but the problem is he's making the application to Job.
To a righteous man.
Job, you're unrighteous. Remember, and he says in chapter 4, verse 3, remember the days when you have admonished many and you strengthened the weak hands? That's gone because you're evil. You've done things that are wrong.
Yeah.
And I think Job is expressing in verse 4 here, chapter 6, the common thinking of the day is that God is oppressing me when I do something wrong. The problem is, Job couldn't figure out what he did wrong.
Yeah.
But he's expressing the arrows of the Almighty are within me. He thinks God is causing this.
He's willing to accept that this is coming from God, but he's not able to understand why. And, come on now.
That's the arrow of the day, the question of the day. If you've done wicked, the arrows of the Lord are against you.
Yeah. And so he's basically, throughout this all, he's going to be defending his innocence and really seeking to know the reason why he's suffering. So a couple of things are going to be pervasive in Job's response. He's going to continue to affirm his innocence and continue to ask, why is this happening to me? Why? And he'll say more and more and more. He'll say, why is God doing this to me? Because I haven't done anything wrong. Okay.
I think that's part of the growth that he's going to undertake. He believes the error of the day, the righteous or the unrighteous are punished by God. Always, if you're being punished, then you're being punished by God because you're unrighteous.
So I think that's a good point to bring out. He is not different than the others in this basic erroneous assumption. If you suffer, it's because you've done bad. He does not deny that principle. He just denies that it's his case.
Right, and that's the problem he's facing.
Yeah.
He believes that, but he can't rectify it with his own self.
Yeah.
With what he believes, what he understands, with what his
How?
belief in God.
Yeah. I think that's really important to bring out. Thank you. I think that's exactly right. So still in chapter 6, Job is responding at verse 14. To him that is afflicted, pity should be shown from his friend, but he forsaketh the fear of the Almighty. My brethren have dealt deceitfully as a brook, and as the stream of brooks they pass away. And so Job is already beginning to tell his so-called comforters that they're not really doing a very good job of comforting him. He said, somebody in my shape, they should receive pity, but you all haven't. And he says, my brethren have dealt deceitfully as a brook, and as the stream of brooks they pass away. I was wondering about that expression. They have dealt with me deceitfully like a brook. The best I could come up with on that is, do you ever maybe come upon a little creek or something, and you think, I believe I could step across that. I think I could get across there without getting wet. And you always never do. It looks doable, but it's not. It's deceitful. And so I think that's maybe the basis of that expression, deceitful like a brook. He continues, Job continues. There's a lot of verses there that we'll pass over them for sake of time and get through this section. In chapter 7, excuse me, before we get to that, look at still in chapter 6, look at verse 24. Chapter 6, verse 24. Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred. That's that notion that we were just talking about. I want to know if this is if God in fact punishes the wicked, and I'm being punished by God, please tell me what the wickedness is. Provide the proof. Show me. Teach me. I will hold my tongue. If you can actually convict me of wrongdoing, if you can literally show me things that I've done that are against the will of God, I'll hold my tongue. I'll stop complaining. But I need to understand wherein I have erred. And that's going to be repeated again and again. Okay, in chapter 7, look at verse 3. Job's still speaking, and this is still his response to Eliphaz's first speech. In chapter 7, verse 3, he says, "So I am made to possess months of vanity, and wearisome nights are appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise, and the night be gone? I am full of tossings to and fro until the dawning of the day. My flesh is clothed with worms and clots of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome." Now, I think we talked about this some last week when we talked about the terrible condition that he was in. And I really doubt that we can even fully picture just the horrible pain and suffering that he was enduring. Again, remember, this is not just a tale. This is not folklore. This is the accounting of a real historical character and the actual events that happened to him. And so he's in really, really bad shape, as he describes there. In verse 6, he says, "My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope." I think that last expression is probably one to key in on. He has no hope. He's not, a lot of times we talk about the fact that whatever's going on with you, whatever you're dealing with in life, whatever issues you're having, health problems, whatever, if there's a glimmer of hope at the end of the way, light at the end of the tunnel, as we say, if you can, it may be way off there in the distance, but if you have just a little bit of hope that things will improve, you can keep going. But Job here expresses that his days are spent without any hope, which is the situation that he is in. Verse 11, 7:11. "Therefore I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul." So he's not going to give up his case. He's not going to stop responding when he's being falsely accused. He's going to respond. He says, "I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul." And part of that complaint, as it keeps going, he's going to start complaining against God. You might make a note there at 7:11. "I will not refrain my mouth." Later, Job's going to say, "I said too much already. I put my hand on my mouth. I've said too much already." Later, he will refrain his mouth, but right now he's not in the mindset to do that. And skip down to verse 20. The King James there, I think, is not helpful the way it's translated. King James has it, "I have sinned, what shall I do unto thee?" That doesn't seem to fit. That doesn't seem to fit with the storyline that we're developing here. And other versions, the English Standard Version says, "if I have sinned." Well, that's better, right? The New American Standard says, ask a question, "Have I sinned?" Is the way the New American Standard has it. So you might make a note there at verse 20 that I don't think the King James is helping us much there, because it's actually conveying exactly the opposite of what I think Job is saying. Job's saying, "If I have sinned, what shall I do to thee? O thou preserver of men, Why hast thou set me as a mark against thee, so that I am a burden to myself? And why dost thou not pardon my transgression and take away mine iniquity? And now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be. Again, so he's saying, if I've sinned, why don't you pardon me? Have I sinned? Why don't you pardon me? And let's get past this, basically, he's asking of God. And so, that's how he ends his speech. Sarah?
So do you think that, in chapter 2 where it says, in all of this Job did not sin or blame God, but here he's asking God, why have you made me your target?
Yeah.
So do you think that he's kind of morphed into an attitude of maybe blaming God?
Yeah, I think he is. I think that's going to grow. Wayne?
Yeah, in verse 19, I think it's an important part because he's charging God with not letting it go.
Mm-hmm.
He says, wilt thou never turn thy gaze away from me? And the gaze is the persecution, the treatment that he's been getting. Wilt thou never turn thy gaze away from me, nor let me alone until I swallow my spit?
Yeah.
I can't even swallow my spit, and you're on top of me every minute of every day.
Yeah.
And then he gets to this, what have I done? Have I sinned?
Yeah.
Tell me what I sinned. If I've sinned, show me my sin.
And why don't you just and why won't you pardon me? But instead of continuing to heap all this trouble on me, why don't you pardon me? I think that's right. So we're just out of time. This is a good place to stop. So we've been through Eliphaz's first speech and Job's response to it. Would you say that we've made any progress, that Job and his friends have made any progress in either comforting Job or coming to an understanding of this, all the circumstances? There's no progress here at all, right? They've had a lot of words, but they haven't made any progress toward real understanding, and that's going to go on for a while. All right, so Lord willing, we'll pick up at chapter 8 next week, and that will be the first speech of Bildad, and he's not going to be any better. In fact, I think, as I said earlier, I think we'll see that their accusations against Job and their reproving of Job will get harsher and stricter as these speeches progress. Okay, thanks everybody.